how are we going to start? The usual joke followed by the usual groans. The housewives of Worthington Acres came to order. The group had evolved from informal coffee visits and light-hearted complaints to a neighborhood organization of sorts. While the meetings still leaned towards boasting and venting, they also exchanged useful information and occasionally took on neighborhood improvement projects. But they didn't pretend it was anything more than a support group for the pressures of being housewives and mothers. It was clear that Janet had something important to share. The familiar pool toy, with its neatly lettered "Don't Ask" label, was passed to her. Tom has been accepted at Tech. With a scholarship, she almost shouted. Everyone congratulated her, commenting on how impressive it was. And to think, he was almost expelled from middle school, Vicky added. More than once. How did you get him to make such a turnaround? Oh, that's right. You all were on that trip to the coast that summer. Janet chuckled, joined by the others' giggles. Well, some of the girls had seen a few stories and some books and... she explained, with some of the others chiming in with anecdotes. Vicky was shocked. You can't be serious. How did you manage that? With a lot of help from our friends, Janet replied, with knowing looks exchanged around the room. Including you. Me? Vicky frowned, then remembered. Those papers. Your niece? Oh. She had used her part-time job at the school district to file some paperwork for Janet just before her vacation. Hey, I could have gotten in trouble for that. Not really, Janet reassured. We had you covered, just in case. The meeting moved on to other topics. As they were leaving, Janet handed Vicky a folder and a couple of books. Just some light reading, she grinned. Vicky got home and saw a phone message. After glancing at the ID, she briefly panicked at the memory of the meeting. Then, she calmed down. Since it was from the school, it had to be about one of the kids. Job-related calls from the district office were routine. As she had guessed, it was about Davey. He and a few others had been caught hanging out in the spot and were facing 2 days of detention. The spot was an area under one of the stairways where, if you looked up at the right angle, you could see up some of the students' clothing. The school had long ago conducted a study and found that the area didn't provide much of a view, but that didn't stop the students from being drawn there by curiosity. Those caught were given a lecture about respect and privacy and sometimes detention. But they also made sure to call the parents twice, first in front of the student, explaining the offense and consequences, and then privately, to do some damage control. Vicky sighed and returned the call. The dean reminded her that it was Davey's 3rd time being caught there, but he didn't seem to be the leader of the group. He also noted that school would be out in a week, and he didn't want to interfere with finals and other end-of-year activities. Vicky thanked him and hung up. Davey got home much later than usual. After-school detention had caused him to miss the bus, so he had to walk the half-mile home. He knew better than to call for a ride under the circumstances. When he walked in, he was sent straight to his room to do his homework and think about what he had done until his father got home. He wasn't happy about it, but he knew his dad wouldn't be the type to hit him. His mom just wanted to make sure both parents were involved in addressing his school issues. They'd started this approach after Sherry had successfully played them off against each other when she was in 5th grade. He was willing to bet that the detention wasn't the only consequence he'd face. Geez, he thought. And I never even got to see anything. It was so unfair. Not even a glimpse of clothing. He'd seen more at the pool than under those stairs. And a lot more on the internet. He let his mind wander over things he'd seen online as he kicked off his shoes and flopped on his bed. He was tempted to go back online and look at a few of his favorite sites, but he knew if his mom caught him, there'd be even bigger trouble. On the other hand, he didn't need to finish his history paper, and for that, he needed some more online research. If she walked in and found him working on his homework, it might help his case. And if the browser windows for his paper were covering up a few other pages, what could it hurt? He turned on the computer and pulled up his report. It mostly needed a spell check and the bibliography, but he was sure his mom didn't know that. He started the spell check, then left it paused on the first error. He opened a browser window for research, bringing up the sites he'd used for the report. He also brought up a new window to continue his research. If he was going to get in trouble anyway, he might as well see what he'd been curious about. He had just found a good website when he heard footsteps outside his door. He quickly minimized the screen and started looking at his report when the door opened, and his older sister burst in uninvited. Smirking at him, she grinned. "You're really in trouble this time. When Dad gets here, I bet you'll be grounded for the whole summer. Or worse. And I'm going to enjoy every minute." Sherry was still upset with him for accidentally telling on her. Not that he wouldn't have done so on purpose, but this time was an accident. Their mom had been frustrated with Sherry for some reason and told her to take out the trash while she was at the store. When she left, Sherry told him that Mom had said for him to take it out immediately. When he did, he cut his hand on something. It wasn't a serious cut, but he got blood on his t-shirt and jeans before he bandaged it up. Their mom freaked when she saw the blood and bandage. He explained what happened, exaggerating the claim that it was because she had insisted he take the trash out. As a result, Sherry had to do all the chores for the next week and couldn't hang out with her friends or boyfriend that weekend. As soon as they were out of earshot from their mom, Sherry hissed that he should watch his back because she would get her revenge. She was always trying to boss him around anyhow, just because she was 3 years older and in high school. And more often than not, their mom seemed to turn a blind eye to it. "Get out of here, Sherry. I'm trying to do my history paper." "Yeah, right, you little sneak. I bet you were looking at something you shouldn't again." "MOM. Sherry's in my room bugging me. I'm trying to do my homework, like you said." "Sherry, get out of his room," their mom called out. "I'm going, MOM." Then, more quietly, Sherry laughed. "Just wait. Dad'll be home any minute. I hope I get to watch." With that, she stomped out and went back to her room. He quickly got up and closed the door. He was sure she left it open deliberately just to bug him. Then he minimized his browser and quickly went back to work on his paper. As soon as Glenn stepped through the front door, he could tell someone was in trouble. He just hoped it wasn't him. Probably Davey. He wasn't a bad kid, really. The problem was that Vicky hadn't had experience living with boys before Davey was born. She'd been surrounded by women, her sisters, cousins, and thought boys would just be like that. When Davey came along, she thought she'd have another Sherry, just with a different perspective. Glenn helped her understand differently. Despite the confusion, they'd done all right. Davey got in trouble here and there, but nothing too unusual for a boy his age. Like when he and another kid had been arguing in the hallway, or when he'd gotten into trouble in the spot. On the other hand, Sherry was about due for another incident. Her stunt with the trash was one of her milder ones. She had real issues with control, especially when it came to her brother. Glenn couldn't count how many times he'd caught Sherry trying to get Davey into trouble or trick him into doing something wrong. While Vicky was aware of this, she just saw it as normal sibling rivalry. She would punish Sherry if she got caught, but didn't seem to get too upset. She did worry about some of the incidents Sherry had gotten involved with in the past. Like the time she was sent home for dress code violations or when Sherry tried to manipulate a situation to hurt someone in her rival group. That time had been recorded, and Sherry had been caught trying to plant evidence to support false accusations. It had been one of the things that led to her suspension. The worst part was when some of the kids in Sherry's circle had pressured others into making bad decisions, and it had been overheard by staff members. Some leaders were expelled, and Sherry narrowly avoided expulsion because her role was limited to lookout. But it had been a big issue for Glenn and Vicky. Even though it took a long time for Sherry to regain their trust, she worked hard to do so, especially after she started dating one of the boys involved. For all that, though, she wasn't a bad kid. She had a lot of growing to do, but she wasn't a lost cause. It was just hard to deal with the sibling rivalry between her and Davey. It seemed paradoxical. Davey got into less trouble and nothing too serious, but Vicky responded more harshly to his missteps than she had to Sherry's. Glenn was firm about making sure they agreed on punishments, giving Vicky time to cool down and for him to add some perspective. The issues at school were usually addressed by whichever parent was closest at the time. It was probably Davey, and most likely something to do with school. Glenn sighed, pulled his thoughts together, and headed for the kitchen to greet his wife. "Hello, love of my life. What happened this time?" "Your son got caught again with an inappropriate behavior issue at school," Vicky said with emphasis, clearly annoyed. "What did the dean have to say in the real phone call?" Glenn knew how the situation worked. The usual. It's not as serious as it sounds, just another opportunity to teach him about personal boundaries and respect. They don't want it to affect finals and other end-of-year activities, she huffed. What did he get? 2 days of after-school detention. Today and tomorrow. And the usual ineffective lecture. Why do they even bother? Glenn sighed. What would you have them do? Strap him to a beam and give him 30 lashes? Sure, it was a poor choice. But he's a 13-year-old boy, and making mistakes and dealing with curiosity are normal parts of that. What's next? Using binoculars to peek in the neighbor's windows? Or trying to sneak into Sherry's room? Don't give him ideas. Look, the male body is a mystery to him. He knows the basics in theory, but he's still figuring things out. His hormones and curiosity are driving him to learn more. He's making some poor choices in how he's going about satisfying that need for answers. But there are much worse things he could be doing, and he's not. What do you want to do? Just ignore it? Of course not. We can make it clear that we support the school in this matter and impose the same consequences at home. We can ground him for those same 2 days and have a long talk with him about respect, boundaries, and dealing with these feelings. Unless you want me to go buy a set of chains. In the end, she went along with the grounding. Glenn spent the better part of 2 hours, interrupted only by dinner and a bathroom break, talking to Davey about behavior, consequences, and responsibility. Davey spent a few minutes finishing up his report, then got ready for bed. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day. The next day, he was too busy to get into much trouble. He walked home after serving his detention. There was a silver lining to being grounded. It gave him time to study and work on his class projects. And Sherry was too busy with her own chores and schoolwork to bug him. Friday started off interestingly. Davey had just opened his bedroom door to go to the bathroom when the bathroom door flew open and his sister dashed to her room. She was wearing only a bra, panties, and a towel wrapped as a turban, carrying some wet clothes. She was there and gone in a flash, giving him little more than a brief glimpse. School was pretty much all review for next week's finals. Even P. At least the detention was over. And the grounding. As soon as he got home, he grabbed a snack, threw on his trunks, and headed for the pool. After a couple of hours of swimming, hanging with friends, and chatting with girls, he was ready to head home and get to work. He figured that if he finished his class projects tonight, he could enjoy the weekend. But things didn't go as planned. With one thing and another, he found himself working on the projects Sunday afternoon. His dad was at a meeting at the church and expected to be home shortly before dinner. Davey settled in to finish his projects and print them. He had the covers ready, the stapler at hand. The next 2 hours were spent checking, polishing, and in one case, redoing parts of the projects. He started printing one, then realized he was missing something. He had just started going downstairs when he heard his dad walk in the door. Hey, Dad. Do you know where the 3-hole punch is? Welcome home yourself, Davey, Glenn teased with a grin. I think it's still in the office. What do you need it for? My homework projects. I need to punch them to get them into the covers. I'm printing one out now. Okay, give me a few minutes and I'll get it for you. Thanks. Could you bring me some more printer paper while you're at it? I'll be in my room, slaving away, Davey replied, feigning melodrama. Glenn chuckled and shook his head. He went to the kitchen to say hello to Vicky and catch up on the day's news. Davey knew it would be a few minutes before his dad got back, so he started another report printing. He also opened another window and tried a quick search for something he'd heard about. The splash page had just come up when he heard his father on the stairs. He quickly hid the window behind the schoolwork screens, then moved to take the first report out of the printer basket. It wasn't complete yet, so he was waiting for the rest when his dad knocked and then came in. He handed Davey the punch and paper, then stayed to ask about his schoolwork. Davey complained that he had to do both a project and a final for history, and that he had finals for 4 core classes, including history, tomorrow. Glenn offered his sympathy and noted that at least the hardest part would soon be over. They got so involved in their discussion that neither of them heard Vicky come up the stairs and into the room. She started to ask them something about dinner when the computer suddenly blared an alert. They turned to look and found a pop-up advertisement on the screen featuring a scantily clad model with a message about a special free offer. Davey quickly grabbed the mouse and closed the window, but the damage was done. What was that doing there? Vicky demanded. I don't know. It was just one of those pop-ups or something. It wasn't there a minute ago. You saw, Dad. Tell her. Davey said, panic rising. Well, that's true. When I came in, there wasn't anything like that on the screen. Just the reports you were printing out. Davey started to relax a little. But it had to come from somewhere. And it probably left some unwanted adware on your computer. You know what we've told you about browsing certain sites. And what were you doing looking at that in the first place? Vicky asked, raising an eyebrow. But I wasn't even. It didn't necessarily come from a bad site, but it sure wasn't somewhere you were supposed to be. Glenn turned to Sherry, who had come to see what the noise was about. Both of you need to get off your computers and run the cleanup programs. And when you're done, come down and set the table. Dinner is almost ready, Vicky added. Sherry returned to her room, with a smirk Davey couldn't help but notice. His mom had her, how could you, look, and even his dad looked disappointed in him. They went downstairs, while he shut down the word processing and browser windows. His reports were still printing, but he knew the scans would not have any problem with that. They would just be a bit slow. He started the scan and cleanup programs, then went and washed his hands. Sherry was just leaving the bathroom as he went in. She gave him one of her superior sneers as they passed, but didn't say anything. He was downstairs a moment later, helping set the table. Nothing was said during dinner, but after the table was cleared, his dad rendered the verdict. You know better than to visit websites like that. Not only are you too young for that kind of content, Davey winced at that one and Sherry smirked. But you can accidentally download harmful software, which could affect the whole household's computers. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Davey looked at his feet. I know you have a lot to do in the next couple of days, with finals and all. So you're on probation. If we find out you've been on any sites like that again, I will cut off your internet connection for at least a week. And that's in addition to any other consequences your mom or I decide on. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Good. Now go back up to your room and finish your reports and studying. I don't think you'll have time for anything else tonight. And don't stay up too late, his mom added. You need your rest for tomorrow. He made his way back to his room and settled in at the computer. The 2 reports were done printing, and the scans had finished. One bit of good news was that the scans had only found some harmless tracking cookies. He deleted those and went back to the online class notes. He carefully stacked and punched the reports, then fastened them into their covers. He studied some more, then got ready for bed. He called good night down to his parents, who answered in kind, then curled up in bed with one of his textbooks. He quickly read himself to sleep. The next day, his mom woke them up early so they could have a good breakfast. She had read something about the importance of a healthy breakfast for test performance and wouldn't take no thanks for an answer. They had a system for special breakfast mornings before school. Davey would have a brief chance to use the bathroom, then Sherry would have the bathroom for the rest of her morning routine. Davey gathered his books and papers, then ate breakfast while waiting for Sherry. Afterward, he showered and dressed while she ate. It wasn't a bad system. It reduced morning arguments and gave their parents a chance for brief, separate talks with each of them over breakfast. This morning's talk was nothing more than a pep talk about the finals and a check to make sure he had his projects ready to go. He got the feeling that they were waiting for their conversation with Sherry and just going through the motions with him. Not that they weren't interested in him, but there seemed to be something else going on. He shrugged, knowing there was little chance he would find out what it was. After breakfast, he hurried upstairs, hoping for a repeat of Friday. No such luck. She was already back in her room. He got ready, then headed out the door to school. History was manageable. He turned in the project, and the final wasn't too bad. There were too many questions, but nothing he didn't know. Language arts, on the other hand, was more stressful than he expected. Ms. de Finister had a reputation for favoring the girls over the boys, and today she was in rare form. She seemed already upset when they walked into the room, which was never a good sign. Something must have happened in her first period. And, knowing her, it was probably something she blamed on a boy. The trouble started before class, when Cheryl pretended to drop her book. She bent over to pick it up, deliberately positioning herself in a way that would catch Steve's attention. Some of the students laughed. Steve made a comment jokingly, and that's when Ms. de Funister stepped in. She sent Steve to the dean's office and threatened the boys who had laughed with lower grades. As usual, no action was taken against Cheryl or the girls who laughed along. By the end of the period, 8 boys had been reprimanded. Davey had managed to avoid getting caught, but some of the boys who were disciplined were his friends, and he knew the grading would be just as unfair. All through lunch, he stewed over the situation. This kind of thing shouldn't happen, and the school wasn't doing anything about it. He couldn't do much about it either. Feeling frustrated, he dumped his tray and headed to the boys' room.